And I'm just going to say we're catching up a little bit because I turned on our recording late. We have some people who choose to watch these later. So again, Bullion Employment Department listening to us, but wow, what a tumultuous process this has been. We are on batch 11 of rule writing associated with paid leave Oregon insurance. And I will say that what I'm seeing in those digests around the rules are getting down into some pretty fine detail, which is an indication for us that we may actually be making some of the final steps towards no more change. But this last change was a doozy. It was a doozy. So the big issues were, we need to clarify the overlaps in timelines and projections, the frustrations with process navigation, which I'm not sure we fully dealt with, and then frustration with timelines. And again, that continues forward. And I think that will keep going until we actually normalize what the rules are, until we can get static for a while on what is the rule that everybody is to be following. It's very difficult to navigate not only processes that are changing, but also streamline and get some consistency in timelines and processing. Now, some of you probably chose to go with third-party insurers, so you're not using the state for this. And a majority of you, I would say, are experiencing really quick turnaround times, and that's not an issue. There are a couple insurers out there that are struggling with timelines. They are struggling with manual processes because their systems have not been updated according to the newest rules, as well as if you're with the state, the timelines are just rough. They're just absolutely rough, which then in our HR space makes it very difficult because we're looking at things like, well, are they protected or are they not? Do I have to assume they're protected until I hear back from the state? And that may be 3 or 4 weeks. What do we do if it's not protected at the end of this? Well, it's really not a whole lot different than it was under OFLA, right? Somebody applies for it, they're conditionally approved. Ultimately, if indeed the paperwork doesn't justify that, then we go back and we unapprove them and give them back all of their time. That's it. It's pretty straightforward. But with the overlap and the changes associated with that, that's been fixed. So let's talk about some of those things. These are the pieces of legislation that really impacted this. So Senate Bill 999, Senate Bill 1515, both 2024. And again, these are things that are already implemented. So you should already be doing this. So under the Oregon Family Leave Act, this is just more of a reminder than anything else. Don't forget that that benefit year indeed did change. Now, all of us were scratching our heads going, why in the world is the benefit year still changing when the reason they did that was to get the concurrency to work out? Now we know that the change in paid leave Oregon insurance is to not have them run concurrently, to break them apart from each other, but they didn't repeal this action. So your benefit year for OFLA, Oregon Family Leave Act, and for paid leave Oregon insurance, now starting on July 1st, now is counted starting the Sunday prior to their first use of leave. And because these two benefits no longer run concurrently, they will be different leave years for each person. Okay, because you can't use OFLA at the same time as paid leave Oregon and vice versa. So they will be different leave years. But the way we determine the benefit year is going to be the same for both OFLA and paid leave Oregon insurance. If you have not made these changes yet under OFLA, get on it. These actually were to receive a notice by the 1st of May this year that this was changing, and to the greater benefit of the employee in any of those changes. So essentially their leave years are starting over again. So although the benefit year does align with PLO, they do not run concurrently. So big important thing to remember there. So the reasons for leave under OFLA as we used to know them, so the old list was parental leave, serious health condition of an employee, serious health condition of a family member, had its own definition of family member, sick child. So this is that they've got the sniffles and somebody needs to stay home with them, or an adult, or at least somebody masquerading as one needs to stay home with them. For pregnancy and birth, Pregnancy disability is how most of us think about that. Bereavement, military family leave, and domestic violence. All of those fit under OFLA in some way, shape, or form. The revised list is a whole lot shorter. Now, you can imagine why. We basically ended up with a list that removed the majority of qualifying instances from OFLA. However, they are maintained in PLO, in paid leave Oregon insurance. And that is because paid leave Oregon insurance is obviously the greater benefit, because there is some insurance benefit that comes with it that was not under OFLA. So now we have this revised list that started at the beginning of the month: sick child, and this is serious health condition or non-serious health condition. So this is one of those places where you really have to pay attention. If a person is put on OFLA due to a sick child with a serious health condition, and you subsequently get notice that the person applied for their paid leave Oregon insurance benefits, they cannot run concurrently. Okay, so you as the employer only have responsibility for OFLA. So as the employer, you need to reach out to that employee and let the employee know you cannot have both at the same time. Which are you choosing to continue? It is their choice. We don't get to choose for them. Okay, so when they make that choice, then you follow through with whatever the choice is. However, if they don't make the choice, your best bet or your least risky choice is to end their OFLA and send them notice that because of your notification that they are on paid leave Oregon insurance and they did not respond to your request for which they were continuing, you are ending their OFLA coverage. Okay, so don't forget about that. Pregnancy and birth. Under paid leave Oregon insurance, there is a 2-week coverage, and you'll see that here in a couple slides, specifically for pregnancy and birth. Again, they can't run at the same time. They do not run concurrently, so it's your job. Leave is still in OFLA, but it now has restrictions on its use. So it's limited to up to 2 weeks per death. So they don't have to use it all, but up to 2 weeks per death, and no more than a total of 4 weeks in the benefit year. So if a person had 4 people that meet the family member definition pass in their benefit year, their OFLA benefit year, and they only used partial weeks, as long as the totality does not exceed 4, they qualify. And then military family is continuing forward in this. And just a brief reminder, military family is that somebody's been called up for deployment, spouse, partner, family, and ultimately that the individual gets to take up to 2 weeks per instance to help get things ready for that deployment. So question is, if the employee selects OFLA and not paid leave Oregon, do they give up their paid leave Oregon paid benefits? So the employee can change their mind at any time to then apply for paid leave Oregon benefits. So no, they don't give up their right to it just because they've selected OFLA at the beginning. They can back and forth it if they want to. And remember, paid leave Oregon benefits can be used intermittently, just as OFLA can be used intermittently. So it would not be uncommon to see 2 weeks of one, 2 weeks of another, 2 weeks of one, 2 weeks of another. The reality, though, is that's only going to be in the serious health condition for the sick child. Pregnancy, disability, or pregnancy and birth, there is a only 2 weeks of the paid leave Oregon insurance under that, where they could use their entire 12-week allowance under OFLA. So it's unlikely we're going to see that teeter-totter. Cheryl, if that answers your question, let me know in the chat. If not, we can talk more about it or share another more specific question. Okay, so just as a summary, the action items associated with all things OFLA are: employees needed to be notified of those changes, the benefit year, and the reasons for leave, that those were changing. If you happen to have anybody who was on an OFLA qualifying instance and that qualifying instance ended at the end of June, their OFLA is done. Which for some instances meant the employee was being called back to work. If you happen to have somebody who still is on an OFLA qualifying leave that is no longer an eligibility criteria, you need to figure out what you're doing. Are you giving them an extended leave of absence, which you might be doing under the ADA, any number of things that could be happening there, but they are no longer on a legally qualifying OFLA instance if it was an instance that is gone at the end of the year, like serious health condition for the employee or a family member. Okay. So notices were required associated with this. You've got to update your handbooks. If you have not updated the information that shows what the eligibility criteria is for each of these leaves, you got to get that in there. And then please, 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 please train your managers for the right red flags. This issue of who in the world would even know if so-and-so had X, Y, and Z or had an instance that may qualify? The first person who's usually going to know is a supervisor. Okay, so make sure those managers and supervisors know what they're looking for associated with this. So stepping back into the chat here for a second, the previous question was trying to understand the communication between the organization and the employee. If they flip-flop, is it repeated messaging and then tracking? I think the answer would be yes. Generally speaking, when you have a individual who has applied for paid leave Oregon insurance, they are approved for a certain usage. And if they are approved for intermittent and they tell you, I'm going to take 2 weeks of this, and then I want 2 weeks of OFLA, 2 weeks of this, 2 weeks of OFLA, I would suggest that that letter approving intermittent use on a 2-week cadence with a subnote saying, and we understand you're using paid leave Oregon as this other, is the most appropriate. But don't forget that language in your messages that say, if any of what has been articulated above, how the leaves are going to be used, changes, it is the employee's responsibility to let the employer know. So that we essentially put the ball back in their court, because this is one of those places where we are always really careful about, they're out on a leave. We don't contact people while they're out on leaves unless it's usually about their return to work. So we aren't there with them. We don't see things that are changing when they're not at work. So you got to put the responsibility back on them. So generally, yes, I think it should be in the initial memo, but that changes need to be reported to you in a timely manner so that you can update any of your documentation. Quite honestly, just be aware of what you're trying to accomplish with your resources is also needed. So next thing in chat, what about typical birth? How does that work? Vaginal birth, no bed rest needed prior to birth. Would that be 6 weeks of OFLA, then 6 weeks of OFLA and disability? I'm just reading to myself now. And then they apply for 12 weeks of bonding under PLO and FEMLA. So typically healthy birth, 6 weeks of OFLA, disability, and then 12 weeks of PLO. So there are, I'm going to flip back a slide here. Pregnancy and birth under, so pregnancy disability. So this is, the stuff that covers, need a sonogram prior to delivery, need blood work done, going in for monthly appointments or more repeated appointments closer to delivery. This is what typically covers up to when baby comes, when baby's born. And there is a full 12 weeks that people are eligible to take under OFLA associated with that. Well, there is also 2 weeks under PLO. So it is possible that we have a person who takes maybe 2 weeks of PLO because they want the pay prior to delivery, okay, right up against it, or maybe a planned cesarean or those types of things. But the reality being that that then changing into PLO and FEMLA, yes, running concurrently as long as the year lines out the right way with them and they haven't had other things that have interrupted that. Generally speaking, people's best bet and most common, at least as they're seeing it to date, which we don't have a lot of history on this right now, is that they're taking OFLA, pregnancy and birth, first, then they're jumping into the PLO and potentially FEMLA and finishing that out. But PLO and FEMLA, first is PLO, paid leave Oregon insurance, as the pregnancy and birth, and then it flips over to a different criteria being bonding with child. So hopefully that answers your question. Could they go back and forth? Yeah. Will most people? It doesn't look like that's the case right now. So we'll have more as we have a few more months under our belts, because apparently, and I think not to any HR person's surprise, but to employment department's surprise, that is the majority of the reason. Pregnancy, birth, bonding with child, the majority of reasons why people are utilizing the paid leave Oregon insurance. So, which I actually think is a lot of the discussion of why the legislature even was interested in doing this. So I don't know why anybody's surprised about that, but apparently they are. At least that's what they keep saying. So hopefully that helps. So your action items, again, notify employees. If you haven't done that, you were actually legally required in the legislation to provide these notices. Now, is Bully out there beating anybody over the head because they didn't do this? No, but you need to do it, okay? Needless to say, confusing as all get out for most people. So update your handbooks, train your managers. Okay, so this was about, and I wanted to include it just because if you haven't done this, you still need to do it. Again, if you have somebody who was on continuous or intermittent OFLA and the eligibility reason went away June 30th, you needed to do something with them as far as tell them about other eligibility, if there was any, and make a decision about how you're handling the remainder of what was that approved leave. Okay. You may end up rescinding essentially the designation of OFLA because of the change in the law. Essentially, it ended at this date. It is no longer OFLA. It is now whatever it is that you're going to do. Now, if you're going to use the ADA, okay, because again, we're in that circuit, that district that allows us to have an extended leave of absence under the ADA. If that's where you're going, do not automatically turn it into ADA. You have got to engage in the interactive process for you to have the outcome of that being an accommodation, an extended leave of absence. So don't skip over the communication piece, the individual back and forth on what can we do now that this has changed. Okay, now my assumption is most employers are trying to help people make it through this transition, just like we wish there were more people to help us make it through the transitions, because this has been nothing short of frustrating and really difficult to navigate. So again, help your employees here. This whole, hey, nobody knew, but oh, by the way, this doesn't qualify anymore. Probably not going to go great for somebody who is in a qualifying instance. Okay, remember, most qualifying instances are not something we'd wish on our worst enemy. Most. And in most cases, you know, having a new child come to the household is a good thing till you realize you underestimated sleepless nights. But ultimately, you want to make sure you're supporting your employees in this. It's a one-time transition. I feel like I've said that several times. Okay, so it's been a multi-time transition with PLO, but we should be coming to the end of these in this cleanup. So question in the chat, understand the updating the handbook info and leaves question on the notice to individuals. Is that to those currently on leave and could be impacted by the 7-1 change of OFLA, or notice needs to go to all employees outside the handbook update? If you're doing a handbook update, you've covered all the employees. Only those who were on an OFLA leave that was ending because the eligibility criteria went away needed an individual notice. And that's what the law actually required, is that individual employee notice needed to be provided. But you're on the right page of, for everybody else, it's just a handbook notification of the update. So great question, Heidi. Thank you. Okay, so just make sure that you get these in here. And again, on those OFLA notices, if you're just doing them now, the executive order that implemented the rules, and again, because timing's off, that's why there's this an executive order. Normally it would just be a regular rulemaking process. You have to, in that OFLA notice, tell people that they may be eligible for the paid leave Oregon insurance. Okay, that was a requirement in the rule. Let's see, another question in the chat. Is there a legal requirement to notify employees even if our company doesn't qualify for OFLA, only 17 employees? Oh, Bethany, isn't this one of the delights of having less than 25 employees? No, no notice is required if there are less than 25 employees. Yay, we love it. So I'm under that too, as far as an organization is concerned. So this is one of the few things that I get to say, I don't have to do that. So these are changing, but also, you know, and Bethany, you may have experienced this in your organization. You know, people come to organizations believing that whatever their previous organization was doing is what everybody has to do. So I always like to ask people, especially when I'm doing onboarding, you know, what size organization are you coming from? And then do a little bit of information about well, you may have experienced this in a larger organization. We don't have that here. This is what we do. Here's our policies, so on and so forth. You save yourself a ton of grief when somebody comes to you later and says, well, I need the medical certification documentation for X, Y, and Z. It's like, actually, we don't do that here because we're too small. If we just do it up front, it feels less like it's about them and more about the company's decision, which ultimately it is about the company's decision. It's just when we're doing it just in time, when there's an instance sitting there of I need some leave, it's a little harder to get past for the employee. It's harder for them to get past the fact that it's about them. Jan, we do have a handbook update template. Of course we have that. If you're already on, thanks for the question. If you're already on our Advantage plan, whether that's through an association that we have an agreement with, or you directly have it with us, you actually have access to free samples. The free sample update handbooks are on our website. You just have to log in and use your login and password to get to the freebie. If you're on Advantage and you know you are, and you don't know how to log in or use your password, just send an email to info@hranswers.com, and the staff that monitor that email will just be able to send you that template. There is a government template and there is a private industry template. They are written differently because there are different criteria for those. So please let us know which one you want if you're in that situation. I have several things that I will send out in follow-up to this that also give you the language we would suggest as changes just specifically for these things. And you can use that as well. So, okay, let's move on to our favorite paid leave Oregon insurance and the changes that happen there. Again, the majority of paid leave Oregon insurance changes were in Senate Bill 1515. For those of you who are nerds like me, you love reading legislation, Senate bills, and all the conversation that's happening behind them, which is why I reference it here. This one is particularly long. So any night where you've been awake for about an hour unexpectedly and you really need something to put you to sleep, here's your read. Senate Bill 1515 from the 2024 session. You will appreciate greatly how quickly it will put you to sleep. So family member definition. Just remember, this is now the definition for OFLA, which it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for anymore, other than the child piece, and for paid leave Oregon insurance. And that last one was the sentence, that last bullet down there, any individual related by blood or affinity whose close association with a covered individual is the equivalent of a family relationship. The fun part is this is the revised version that was supposed to give us more clarity from the original version. I'm not sure that it does give us a lot more clarity. So I'm going to share my thoughts around this particular topic here, and whether you agree with it or not is actually off to the side. The construct of family has changed very significantly since the origination of the list of family, which happened in OFLA, which was actually an offtake of FEMLA. So OFLA, written someplace in the mid-'80s, I think most of us could at least shake our heads up and down that the construct of family has changed significantly since the middle of the 80s. Now, if we know that OFLA was actually a takeoff from FEMLA, the Federal Medical Leave Act, which preceded that by a number of years, 70s, okay, the construct of family has absolutely changed since then. This sentence is all about saying we recognize everybody has a different sense of family. And if you are in a situation where you have an individual who fits into your construct of family, and you need to go support them in one of the qualifying reasons, which we all know is a very long laundry list, then go do it. And I'm here to tell you, and I think most of you have probably experienced, if you have a person who has a family member, their definition of family, that is struggling, and they want to go support them, I promise you that even if you say no, they are fully present at work. Okay, so the reality here is, and I think most of you have participated in webinars I've done. I lean hard into support your employees. Okay, and in supporting your employees, we do for them the things that are just appropriate to do for the other humans. Okay, and yes, I understand we need to get business done. I own a business. I get it. We have to get work done. There's a balance. There is a place where you draw a line. But if you have a person who is willing to actually say, excuse me, I need to support this person. This is how I have a relationship with them, which is the requirement to file for the insurance. I'm telling you right now, if your employment department and an employee takes the time to actually explain how they have this close association, excuse me, equivalent to a family member relationship, they're going to say yes. And I would also venture to say that most insurance companies as third parties are not going to be the first one on the branch to say, nope, I don't think that's close enough. Okay. Good grief. I apologize. So this is also the place where I'm going to say, if the construct of family has changed, and we aren't in control of making the decision around eligibility, and it's a brand new law and nobody wants to be first on the fence, just understand more people will qualify than less under this language. But in the space of how many people are qualifying under this language, it is still very, very few. Very few. It makes up less than 2% of what employment department has been approving. Less than 2%. That's tiny. So while yes, some of us read that first language and currently read this language, go, wow, you can drive a truck through that. I've probably got a grandpa somewhere in Japan that I don't know about, and I'm going to go take a 23andMe test, and it's going to say I'm have DNA related to whoever in Japan. Everybody's going to go on leave and we're going to have nobody to work. The one thing I do know is not one employer has reported, we literally have no employees in today because they're all out on paid leave Oregon insurance. It isn't happening. Okay. So in the land of, could it be really bad? Yes. Is it likely? No. And we have evidence already that says it's not. Okay, so family member definition. This is where we're at. This is what we're dealing with. This is what your insurers are dealing with. Okay. Accrued leaves for PLO. So this is the change actually was effective July 1. And so are our consultants, hearing from a number of employers who are surprised when we tell them this, which is why I figured I better go ahead and throw it in here. So when this law first came out, employers were allowed to choose if they were going to let employees choose to use their accrued leaves. That's gone. Employers are now required to allow employees to choose if they want to use their accrued leaves. So don't get too hung up on the word accrued. It is what the law says. Some of you may front load your other leaves. So think about this in terms of leaves that they have and can use on your books. That's probably the best way of thinking about it. And I would expect that we're going to see an amendment in the upcoming legislation with regards to the term accrued in here. So employers, if you have been one of those that said, no, we're not going to let people choose to use their leaves, starting July 1st, it is a requirement. So if you are an employer who has adopted that notice that when an employee believes they're going to file for paid leave insurance, they need to fill out a form notifying you, I intend to use paid leave organ insurance. There's pretty high level of information that you can ask from them. That form needs to also have on it what's their election. It also needs to identify on it the order in which their leaves will be used. You get to determine that. So yes, you have to allow them to use it. Yes, you get to decide in what order. Now, for those of you who are public sector, you might want to think about the fact that that you could burn down the comp time. So time that they've earned instead of getting paid overtime, comp time first. Let's burn that off. Sick leave is maybe next because that's also qualifying. And then vacation third. Now, if you're just a full-on PTO, all you've got is PTO, PTO's it. But if you have multiple leave buckets, then you have to describe for the employee in the order they will be used. And please do not do that employee by employee. Just say, if you have leave in any of these buckets, they'll be used in the following order. That's it. So then this last one seems to be something people are pretty happy about because it's been a bit of a struggle for some, especially in the public sector. Employers no longer have to manage to 100% cap. Now, there were rule changes that already allowed you to stop doing this, but it has now been legislated that there is no cap. So if somebody is using leaves to augment benefits, you also need to say how you're going to do that. Now, some employers liked the 100% cap and said, listen, tell us how much you're getting in your benefit from paid leave organ insurance, and you can make up the difference by your leaves. Okay. Other employers have said, you can use as much leave as you want as long as it's not more than your regular rate of pay on a weekly basis. And yes, what I just suggested is that some people are getting their regular rate of pay by using leaves and benefits on top of that. Now, some people say, well, isn't that double dipping? It is. But why do we care? I don't know about all of you, but I way underestimated what it would take to be awake all the time when I had kids, those many, many years ago. Okay. And if DoorDash would have been a thing then, it would have been lovely to have a few extra bucks to be able to have food show up on my front doorstep instead of having to try and make dinner. Okay. So there are times when, because you can do it and you're already budgeted for their regular rate of pay, and their insurance is a bucket that's already being taken care of in other ways, why do we care? Why are we hung up on that? Okay, so really think through what you want your process to be associated with this. And don't forget that when people are only making up the difference, if that benefit slides, especially if they're doing intermittent, if you ended up taking out too much or giving them too much and you're reconciling that, are you going to restore it to leave? Are you going, once they pay it back to you, are you going to restore it to leave? How are you going to get them to pay that back? And remember, you can't just deduct that from a paycheck. Okay. If you over the 100%, no deductions from a paycheck, because essentially that was a loan. Okay. An accidental loan, but a loan nonetheless. And an inappropriate deduction from pay, at least in Oregon, excuse me, is any monies that come ultimately back to the employer. So no, you can't do that. You're going to have to send them a bill. And heaven help you if you have to send them to collections because they don't pay the bill. So think through this. Okay, before I cough uncontrollably, I'm going to ask you to hold on for a second so I can get a drink of water. Okay, sorry about that. I live out in the hinterland and they're harvesting hay. It's not playing nicely with my sinuses. So if you haven't already got a policy in place that says, hey, employee, yes, you can use your accrued leaves. You just need to tell us that you want to do that. You need to add that to your form so that people are informed about that. Employers can determine the order in which leaves are going to be used. And then you also need to deal with how much leave can be used. I have one employer that actually says you can use as much leave as you want, as long as it's not more than your regular rate of pay. And we will allow you to preserve up to 40 hours. So that when you return from whatever the instance is, if indeed you need some time off for the unexpected, you have some. So you absolutely need to think through these. And again, because most of this is going to be information that goes into a handbook, you need to get it to employees. So again, reminders are action items. Get your handbook up to date. Any supplemental forms that you have, that notification form, make sure you notify employees of those changes. And just like we were talking about earlier, if you're doing a handbook update and you're sending that update to everybody, you've solved your notification issues. And then train your managers, same issue. They need to know what they're listening for, what they're looking out for, so that they can share that information with you. Don't forget also on your notification form, we've seen a few of these now. This is also that they are notifying you of something. You can also put a whole lot of information in there for them to be notified of. And when they sign it as an acknowledgement that they've been put on notice. So if you're an employer whose employees need to pay some portion of the elected insurance cost, then don't forget to put on the form that they're still responsible for doing that. If they say no to taking any of their accrued leaves, you need to start a conversation and solve with them, how are you going to be paying your portion of the insurance contribution? You know, by what time in the month? Is it done monthly? Do they need to pay it when they get back? Do they, you know, I mean, all of those types of things. So don't forget to get all that worked out, because that continuation of insurance is a big deal. Okay, so ELO. Employers are required, employees, these are just some reminders that people keep asking us. Employees are required to file for their benefits with the insurer. However, there is part of batch 11 rules That's that most recent grouping of rules that allows a person to designate somebody essentially to assist them. Of course, there's much more technical terminology for that, but they can do that. Now, they may ask the employer, can you help me with this? I don't seem to be getting it, or not getting through the information. While I don't think that's as common, it is possible. And as an employer, you need to make a choice about whether you're going to allow people to designate you as that. I think there can be an inherent conflict of interest there. I know several attorneys who believe that is true, especially if you're a single HR person shop. I think it gets really hard to not have that impact potentially other decisions that are going on. So just think about that and make sure that you understand whatever decision you make is a decision you make for anyone asking that question. It's not a onesie choosy choice. Employees have to take at least full day increments on paid leave Oregon insurance. And so this became kind of a big deal when people realized intermittent serious health condition, let's say asthma, migraines, okay, intermittent partial days under OFLA. Then they knew serious health conditions going away under OFLA. So now I'm applying for PLO to have the same benefit, and it was denied because it wasn't full day increments. Okay, so this did mean some employees had to go get new medical documentation to provide for paid leave Oregon insurance. And what used to be just a part day of absence because of asthma or migraines may now be a full day. So think about your planning associated with those things. You are required to maintain those health insurance benefits. I talked about that already a little bit. If you are using a third-party insurer, you, the employer, are still liable for the appropriate administration of the benefits. So manage the bejesus out of that, if that's a real word, the bejesus out of your contract. While you, I am sure, have some protection, so on and so forth, in that contract that you have written with those third-party insurers, the liability for appropriate administration of paid leave Oregon cannot be transferred to that insurer. Okay, so if you have an insurer, if you're hearing from your employees, hey, this isn't going well, hey, this is not a hands-off, manage your contract. This is no different than if you hired HR answers to come and do a compensation survey and we weren't doing any of our work. You're looking at that contract going, hey, you said you were going to get this done by this date and this date and this date, and you were going to do it this way, and you're not doing any of that. You're in breach of contract. Same thing with your insurers for paid leave Oregon insurance. Okay. So if you're hearing rumblings that your third-party insurer is not doing something right, and after hearing what's happening, you're thinking, yeah, that doesn't seem right. Dig in. Don't let that go. Dig in on that. Okay. If you are planning to change your insurer, let's say from the state to a third party, or from one third party to another third party, remember you still have to do those filings with employment department to say when you're going to do that you're planning to do that. And there are certain windows on a quarterly basis that you have to hit for the application for those changes. And you have to have approval from employment department before you can do that. So a change of who's providing your insurance can only start at the beginning of a calendar quarter. Okay. If you think you're doing something outside of that, then you're probably not following the appropriate process. So just remember that. And then last but not least, if you have somebody who has been out for paid leave Oregon insurance for a serious health condition, either medical or physical of their own, please ask them for a medical release to return to work with any restrictions at the end of that paid leave Oregon instance. Okay, that is the flag for us of, do we need to engage in ADA or do we not? If they're returned with no restrictions, no issue. If they're returned with restrictions, we want to at least have that first interactive discussion to say, do these restrictions get in the way of any of your essential functions? Don't miss your opportunity there. Okay, don't forget to get these releases. Okay. Last but not least, and everybody is super excited to talk about pay, I'm sure. I am, because I love to do salary work. So FLS changes. Yep, they actually happened this time. 2016 was the original thought behind, hey, we need to increase these salary thresholds for the FLSA. And I think all of us remember in excruciating detail that literally the day before it was supposed to implement, it was enjoined by a court in Texas. And so it didn't go anywhere. So then we got a little tied up in, I don't know, COVID and forest fires and all the stuff that's happened over the last 3 years that kept us very entertained. And they finally brought this one back around, and they have been successful at changing now the salary tests associated with white collar exemptions, and highly compensated is going to happen. So thing that is really important to remember here is that this first change that I'm showing you only is white collar exemption. So if it's executive, administrative, or professional. And I've been doing this HR gig now for about 25 years, and it's really kind of crazy. 25 years. Wow. And here's the deal. A lot of the work has been around compensation and defining work, so lots of job description reviews. And I can't think of one job description form that I've seen in an organization that has not only are you exempt or non-exempt, is the position exempt or non-exempt, but when it's exempt, what type of exemption are we talking about? That secondary piece? So here's my plug for, get that on your job descriptions. Because when you're analyzing changes, this is changing in the job. Does that mean that I need to be looking at this or not? You got to know what it was analyzed against to start with. Put it on the job description. Okay. So white collar exemption, executive, administrative, or professional. Those are the three that fall into that. It was $684 a week. Effective July 1st, it went up to $844 a week. And it's going to change again in January to $1,128 a week. Okay, that's still less than what they tried to do back in 2016, but it's pretty dang close. So I gave you the annual amounts here only as a point of reference. The test is on a work week. Okay, work week salary. So not only do they have to meet the duty test of executive, administrative, or professional, they also have to meet the salary tests. Okay, so the work here is, if you haven't already looked at this, you got to pull everybody who's exempt by administrative, executive, or professional exemption and look at what their weekly salary is. And if it's below $844 a week, that position is no longer exempt. That person is no longer exempt. And doesn't that sound fun? Now they get to take breaks and lunches, and they get to actually fill out a timesheet, all that good stuff. Does not sound fun. It's been a really long time since I've been non-exempt. I'm not even sure I know how. I know how to approve people's timesheets, but the reality is you would have to put all that back in place. Now, we have told many organizations, I mean, these are not easy changes for most of you. Okay, there's a lot of work that has to go into this. So if you haven't already gotten all the way through your July work, get on that with some speed, because you're late, and you've most likely issued payroll already for July, even if you're a monthly payer. So don't forget, January will be here before we know it, and get in and get that done. If you're doing it in 2 steps, that's fine, but make sure you get these done. The other thing to remember is they are going to evaluate this now every 3 years. That is part of the law. Just like Oregon minimum wage has an annual cadence to keep it up to date. Federal FLSA exemption criteria for white collar is now going to be every 3 years. So just go ahead and put on that long-term strategic planning calendar that every year, every 3 years. So our next one, let's see, they did this in they put the rule out in 23, probably towards the end of 27. You need on your agenda assessment of FLSA changes. Okay, so there's part of your strategic plan that none of us needed, but all of us got. So the other one that's changing is highly compensated. Now, you probably know that in Oregon, highly compensated is not an exemption. Okay, this is only in federal law, and yes, it applies. Just because Oregon doesn't have it doesn't mean it doesn't apply. The current number is 107,432. In January, that's going to go all the way up to 151,164 annually. Okay, and again, this is going to be reviewed every 3 years. So for those of you who haven't played with highly compensated very often, the requirement is first that it meets the salary test. So come January 1st, that will be 151,164. Second is that it has to meet at least one of the duties in any of the other exemption tests. Okay, so those are the two primary criteria that you got to review for a highly compensated exemption. FLSA has got some great fact sheets out there about those. If you need help finding them, just send us an email at that info, and one of the consultants will get back to you directly with the link, if not me. But again, they're going to review this every 3 years. So your things to do here, again, pull anybody who's exempt and make sure that you're looking at those salary thresholds and that everything is still moving along fine. Your options really are to determine if you're going to raise pay or if you're going to make it non-exempt. And if you're going to make it non-exempt, then don't forget breaks, meal periods, timesheets, notification that it's going to happen. And then also, please don't forget pay equity. Don't forget that you have a pay equity responsibility within each of these, and it needs to align with whatever you're doing in pay equity here for Oregon. Okay, we had another question that came up in the chat, and it's back on paid leave Oregon. So if we were not using a third-party administrator and just went with the state program and employees complain about response times, are employers required to manage the contract, if you will, with the state? You can try, but no, you aren't actually contracting out if you are utilizing the state's program. So you as an employer, but for potentially saying something to your friendly local legislator, really don't have a responsibility to say, hey, state, you're not doing what you're supposed to, unless what you're choosing to do is sue them. And then that would be the avenue in which you would achieve holding them accountable. I would think that as an employer, you would want to get together with other employers if that's what you were doing. And I am in no way suggesting someone should sue the state. Let me be really clear here. I'm not sure that how one would approach that, quite honestly, with this particular case. We do know that I think it was 6 weeks ago now, there was a special hearing had between the several legislators at an emergency board meeting with the employment department, specifically to discuss their timeliness issues and why those have not improved. And so I know that attention and incentive is being applied to this particular issue. They are outside of their anticipated 14-day response on average still, but 14 days is what was written into legislation. Okay, so I don't know that they will ever get better than 2 weeks, but this month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that does need to come to an end, and they've been given specific instruction to put in place a plan to achieve that. Heidi, thank you. I didn't figure anybody thought that I was suggesting you sue the state, but since I'm recording this, I should probably say those things out loud. My sarcasm got the better of me. I apologize. So lots of things that are going on. These are not small things. These are big things. These could have been full-time work for several people in larger organizations, and certainly can take over your well-planned priorities when you're dealing with everyday operations of HR. Because crazy enough, the humans need help sometimes, and they go to HR for that. And that's what we're there for. So not only all of these strategic planning and process pieces, but also just the daily support to those good employees that share their time with us. which we appreciate. So those were the things I wanted to cover for today. Some really great questions there in the chat. I'm going to hang out. I want to honor your guys' time. I know we're just a tiny bit over. Oh, no, right on the button at 1 o'clock. I'm going to stay. So if there are other questions, feel free to take yourself off of mute. If you want to just ask out loud or continue to use the chat, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, but for those of you who need to go, have an excellent week. We've made it to the midpoint. We've only got a couple days left for this week, and then we can do it all over again next week. So thank you for participating today. This will be posted in the next couple of days in our library. It will be free for people to go in and take a look at it. So if you're, again, maybe just needing to go to sleep, you can go and listen to this again. But or if you just, it's like, oh, I forgot that one piece, you can go and look at it whenever you need to. So thank you for your participation today and joining us. Again, I'll stay here if there's other questions.
Hey, Laurie, I have one question. I missed the first part of the webinar because I couldn't connect very well.
Oh, no worries.
And so this question might have been asked. If before July 1st hit,